The message came through every communication channel Earth possessed at exactly 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Jake Morrison was drinking coffee on the bridge of the Earth defense vessel Horizon when the alarm started screaming. He put down his cup carefully and watched as his communications officer Amy Barnes worked frantically at her console. Her fingers moved across the holographic displays with practiced precision, but her face had gone pale. Jake knew that look. Something big had just happened. The translation took 17 minutes. When it finally appeared on the main screen, Jake read it 3 times to make sure he understood correctly. The Galactic Council had made contact with humanity. This should have been a moment of celebration. Humanity had been alone in the universe for so long that many had started to believe they were the only intelligent species out there. But this was not a greeting. This was not an invitation to join the stars as friends. This was a demand. The message was clear and cold. Humanity was to cease all expansion beyond the solar system immediately. All colonies were to be abandoned within 6 months. All vessels currently in deep space were to return to Earth. Humanity would be contained to their home system until the Galactic Council decided they were ready to join the greater galactic community. The timeline for that decision was measured in centuries. The message ended with a simple statement that this was not negotiable. Amy turned in her chair to face Jake. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the anger underneath. She asked what they were supposed to do now. Jake did not have an answer yet. He called up the data on the Galactic Council that had been included with the message. What he saw made his stomach tight. The council consisted of 47 different alien species spread across 3 galaxies. They had technology that made human achievements look like cave paintings. Their territory surrounded human space completely. Earth and its 12 small colonies were like an island in the middle of an ocean they had not known existed. Commander Greg Palmer walked onto the bridge carrying a data pad. His jaw was set in a hard line. He had been reviewing the same information Jake was looking at now. Greg pointed out that the Council had been watching humanity for decades. They had seen every transmission Earth had ever sent into space. They knew everything about human culture and history and technology. They had waited to make contact until humanity had spread far enough to be noticed but not far enough to be a real threat. This was calculated. This was a power play. Jake thought about the colonies. New Horizon had 3,000 people living on it. Families had been born there. Children who had never seen Earth called it home. Liberty Station orbited a gas giant and mined fuel that Earth desperately needed. Darwin Base was a research facility studying alien ecosystems. These were not just outposts. These were communities. And the Council wanted humanity to abandon them all. Amy received another transmission. This one was from Earth. President Helen Carter had called an emergency meeting of every nation's leaders. The message to Jake was simple. Earth Defense Force was to maintain position and await orders. Do not engage. Do not provoke, but do not retreat either. Jake felt a small measure of pride at that. Earth was not rolling over immediately. The next few days were tense. Jake kept the Horizon on patrol at the edge of the solar system. They were watching for any sign of Council ships. Amy monitored every frequency for additional messages. Greg drilled the crew on combat procedures even though everyone knew their weapons would be useless against the technology the Council possessed. But humans did not survive by giving up when the odds were bad. They survived by fighting anyway. The reply from Earth came on Friday. President Carter had made her decision. Humanity would send a delegation to meet with the Galactic Council. They would listen to what the Council had to say. But Earth would not surrender its right to explore the stars. The message was defiant, and Jake loved it. Humanity had spent millions of years clawing its way up from the caves. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and near-extinction events. They had split the atom and walked on the moon and built machines that could think. And now some alien bureaucrats thought they could tell humanity to sit down and be quiet. Jake was chosen to accompany the delegation. Ambassador Lisa Grant would lead the humans. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had spent her career negotiating treaties between nations. She arrived on the Horizon 3 days later with a small staff. Jake met her in the docking bay. She shook his hand with a grip like iron and told him they were going to make history. Jake believed her. The journey to the Council station took 2 weeks. It was located in neutral space far from any system. As they got closer, Jake could see it through the viewports. The station was massive beyond description. It hung in space like a metal moon. Dozens of alien ships were docked along its surface. Each one was different. Each one represented a species that had already joined the Council. Jake felt very small looking at it. Lisa spent the journey preparing. She reviewed everything Earth knew about the Council. She studied reports on alien psychology and culture. She practiced her speech in front of a mirror. Jake asked her once if she was nervous. She smiled and told him she was terrified, but that fear was just another negotiating tool. You acknowledge it and then you use it to sharpen your focus. Jake decided he liked this woman. The shuttle ride to the station was quiet. Lisa sat across from Jake, reviewing her notes one final time. She looked up and met his eyes. She told him that the Council would try to intimidate them. They would show humanity how big the universe was and how small Earth was by comparison. They would expect humans to be grateful just for being noticed. She asked Jake if he understood what that meant. Jake nodded. It meant the Council had badly misjudged humanity. They docked and were escorted through corridors filled with aliens of every shape and size. Some walked. Some floated. Some slithered. All of them stopped to stare at the humans. Jake kept his back straight and his head high. Lisa walked beside him with a slight smile on her face. They were led into a massive circular chamber. Seats rose in tiers around them. At the center was a raised platform where 5 aliens sat. These were the High Counselors, the leaders of the Galactic Council. The lead counselor was tall and thin with skin that looked like crystal. When he spoke, his voice was translated into English by systems Jake could not see. He welcomed humanity to the council chamber. Then he listed every rule humanity had broken: unauthorized expansion, unsanctioned colonization, unapproved use of faster-than-light travel. The list went on. The chamber was silent. Every alien present watched the humans. This was a familiar scene. This was how new species learned their place in the galactic order. The counselor finished his speech. He declared that humanity would withdraw from all territory beyond Earth. They would submit to council monitoring. They would wait for centuries while the council decided if humans were mature enough to join galactic civilization. He stated clearly that this was not negotiable. This was the law that had maintained peace for thousands of years. Jake held his breath. Every eye in the chamber was on Lisa Grant. This was the moment. This was when humanity would learn to bow. Lisa smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been told the rules and decided they were stupid. She thanked the counselor politely for explaining the situation. Then she said 3 words that changed everything. Humanity respectfully declines. The chamber exploded into chaos. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running for 8 hours straight. High Counselor Vex sat in his chamber reviewing the recordings of the human delegation for the 20th time. His crystalline skin pulsed with colors that indicated deep confusion. Nothing in his 300 years of service had prepared him for this. Species did not refuse the council. It simply did not happen. Counselor Tharn floated into the room on his anti-gravity platform. His tentacles were writhing in agitation. He demanded to know how Vex planned to handle the human problem. Vex did not answer immediately. He played the recording again. The human female named Lisa Grant stood before the assembled council with that strange expression on her face. The translation systems identified it as a smile, but there was something else there. Something the systems could not quite interpret. Tharn watched the recording and his tentacles curled tighter. He pointed out that the human had not just refused. She had smiled while doing it, as if the combined might of 47 civilizations was amusing to her, as if the council was telling her a joke instead of delivering an ultimatum. Tharn wanted to know what kind of species responded to overwhelming force with amusement. Counselor Yira entered next. Her feathers were ruffled in a way that indicated extreme stress. She had been reviewing Earth's communication broadcasts, trying to understand human psychology. What she found disturbed her. Humans were aggressive. They fought constantly, not just with other species, but with each other. Their history was an endless cycle of wars and conflicts, yet somehow they had not destroyed themselves. Somehow they kept building and growing despite the violence. Vex pulled up the psychological profile that had been compiled on humanity. The analysts had been working around the clock since the failed negotiation. Their conclusions were troubling. Humans did not respond to authority the way other species did. Most intelligent species had evolved as prey animals or herd animals. They had instincts that made them submit to stronger powers. It was a survival mechanism. But humans were different. Humans were persistence hunters. They were pack predators. Their instinct when threatened was not to submit. It was to fight. Counselor Moran entered the chamber last. He was the eldest of the 5 high counselors. His species lived for thousands of years, and Moran had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. He moved slowly, but his mind was still sharp.
He asked what the others had learned.
Vex showed him the profile on humanity. Moran read it in silence. His expression did not change, but Vex noticed his hands had begun to shake slightly. Tharn demanded action. The Council could not allow a species this primitive to defy them. It would set a dangerous precedent. Other species might begin to question Council authority. The entire system that had maintained peace for millennia could collapse. They needed to make an example of humanity. Send a fleet. Destroy a colony or two. Show them the cost of defiance. Yira disagreed. She pointed out that humanity had already proven they would not back down from threats. Destroying a colony might not cow them. It might enrage them. And an enraged species with nothing to lose was dangerous regardless of their technology level. She suggested a different approach. Economic sanctions. Blockade their space. Cut them off from resources. Force them to comply through pressure rather than violence. Moran listened to both arguments. Then he asked a question that made the others pause. He asked if anyone had actually studied what humans did when they were cornered, when they faced impossible odds, when every logical choice was surrender. Vex admitted that he had not. Moran told them to look at human history. Really look at it. Not just the wars, but the context of those wars. Vex pulled up the historical database. He started reading. Humans had faced extinction dozens of times. Ice ages that should have killed them. Volcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun. Plagues that killed half their population. Asteroid impacts. Near nuclear annihilation. And every single time humans had survived. Not by running. Not by hiding. But by adapting and fighting and refusing to accept death. There was a battle called Thermopylae, where 300 human soldiers held off an army of thousands for days. They knew they would die. They knew there was no hope of victory. But they fought anyway because the alternative was letting the enemy pass. There was a siege called Stalingrad where humans fought over every building and every street. They ate rats to survive. They fought in temperatures cold enough to freeze flesh. They held their city not because they could win, but because surrendering was unthinkable. Yira found records of human explorers. Men and women who sailed into unknown oceans in wooden boats, who climbed mountains that killed more people than reached the summit, who went to the poles of their planet where nothing could survive and planted flags just to prove they could. Humans did not explore because it was safe. They explored because it was dangerous and they did not care. Tharn found something that made his tentacles go still. Humans had a concept called mutually assured destruction. During their Cold War period, 2 human nations built enough nuclear weapons to destroy all life on Earth multiple times over. Then they pointed those weapons at each other and promised that if one attacked the other, would launch everything. Total annihilation for both sides, and this insane strategy actually worked. It kept peace for decades. Humans had stared into the abyss of self-extinction and used it as a negotiating tool. Moran asked the question again. What did humans do when cornered? The answer was clear now. They did not surrender. They escalated. They found ways to hurt you even if it meant hurting themselves. They turned their own extinction into a weapon. Vex felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear. Not fear of human military might. Humans could not win a conventional war against the Council, but they could make that war so costly that the victory would be meaningless. They could turn every colony into a fortress, every ship into a bomb. They could fight with such ferocity that the Council would bleed for every meter of space. Yira brought up the report from the human colonies. In the 3 days since the failed negotiation, every single colony had begun fortifying. They were moving asteroids into defensive positions, building weapons from mining equipment, training civilians for combat. They were not evacuating. They were preparing for war. A war they could not win but would fight anyway. Tharn still wanted to send the fleet. He argued that backing down now would make the Council look weak. Other species would see that defiance was possible. The carefully maintained order would begin to crack. Moran asked him a simple question. Was he willing to sacrifice thousands of Council lives to make a point? Was he willing to watch ships burn and soldiers die just to prove the council was strong? Tharn did not answer. Morin continued. He pointed out that the council was created to prevent extinction, to stop the kind of total wars that had nearly destroyed the galaxy thousands of years ago. The purpose was not to enforce obedience for its own sake. The purpose was to maintain peace and protect life. If they attacked humanity, they would be betraying that purpose. They would become the very thing the council was meant to prevent. Bex asked what Morin suggested. The old counselor looked at the recordings of Lisa Grant again. That smile. That defiant, impossible smile. He said they needed to do something the council had rarely done in its long history. They needed to listen. Really listen. Not to force submission, but to understand why submission was unacceptable to humans. Yira asked if he was suggesting negotiation. Morin said yes. Real negotiation. Not demands followed by compliance. Actual discussion between equals. Tharn protested that humans were not equals. Their technology was primitive. Their territory was tiny. They had no right to demand equal status. Morin stood slowly. His ancient frame somehow still carried authority. He reminded them that the council judged species not just by their technology, but by their potential. By their character. Humanity had shown more character in 3 days than some species showed in centuries. They had faced impossible odds and refused to blink. That took a kind of strength that could not be measured in weapons or ships. Vex asked if they were really going to change thousands of years of policy for one stubborn species. Morin smiled. It was a tired smile, but genuine. He said that the galaxy was changing whether the council liked it or not. New threats emerged constantly. The old ways of doing things might not work forever, and perhaps a species that refused to kneel was exactly what the galaxy needed. Perhaps humanity could teach the council something they had forgotten. That strength was not just in domination, but in the courage to stand firm. The vote was close, but Morin's position won. The council would reach out to humanity again, this time not with demands, but with an offer. Vex was tasked with making contact. He composed a message carefully. He requested another meeting. He promised that this time the council would listen. Jake Morrison received the message aboard the Horizon. He read it twice, then forwarded it to Lisa Grant. Her response came back immediately. She agreed to meet. But this time the meeting would be on human terms. Neutral ground. No massive chambers designed to intimidate. No audience of alien species watching. Just a conversation between people trying to find a way forward. The neutral station was small by galactic standards. Just a simple platform floating in empty space halfway between Earth territory and Council space. Jake Morrison supervised the construction personally. The station had no weapons and no shields. It was designed for one purpose only, a place where two civilizations could meet and talk, without the weight of power dynamics pressing down on every word. Lisa Grant arrived 3 days before the meeting. She wanted time to prepare and to think. Jake found her in the observation deck staring out at the stars. She did not turn when he entered. She just asked him if he thought this would work. Jake admitted he did not know, but he knew that humans had to try. They could not win a war against the council, but they could not surrender either, so talking was the only option left. Lisa smiled at that. She said humans were good at finding options when none seemed to exist. It was practically their specialty. She turned to face Jake and her expression was serious. She told him that the council was afraid. That was new. For thousands of years they had been the ultimate authority. No one questioned them. No one defied them. And then humanity came along and said no. It had shaken something loose in the council's certainty. Jake asked if fear would make them more reasonable or more dangerous. Lisa thought about it. She said it depended on what kind of fear it was. Fear of losing power made people irrational, but fear of being wrong made them thoughtful. The question was which kind of fear the council was feeling. High Counselor Morin arrived exactly on time. He came alone, which surprised Jake. No guards, no advisors, no displays of power, just an old alien who moved slowly and carefully through the airlock. Lisa greeted him formally. Morin returned the greeting with what his species used as a bow. Then he did something unexpected. He apologized. He apologized for the way the first meeting had been conducted, for the demands and the threats, for treating humanity like children who needed to be controlled, rather than people who deserved respect. He said the council had become arrogant over the millennia. They had forgotten that every species deserved dignity. That strength did not give you the right to dictate to others. Lisa listened without interrupting. When Morin finished, she thanked him for the apology. Then she asked the important question. Was he here to negotiate or to deliver a softer version of the same ultimatum? Morin met her eyes. He said he was here to listen. Really listen. He wanted to understand why humanity had refused the Council's authority, what they hoped to achieve, what they feared, what they dreamed of. They sat in a small conference room, just the three of them. Lisa began by explaining human history. She did not sugarcoat it. She told Morin about the wars and the atrocities, about slavery and genocide, about all the terrible things humans had done to each other. But she also told him about the progress, about how humanity had slowly learned to be better, about the long, painful climb toward justice and equality and peace. She explained that humans did not trust authority because authority had been abused so many times in their history. Kings and emperors and dictators who promised order and delivered oppression. Humans had learned the hard way that freedom was more valuable than security, that the right to choose your own path was worth fighting for even when the path was dangerous. Morin listened carefully. He asked why humans were so driven to explore, why they could not be content with their own system, why they needed to push outward into the unknown. Lisa thought about how to explain it. She said humans were curious by nature. They saw a horizon and had to know what was beyond it. They saw a mountain and had to climb it. They saw stars and had to reach them. It was not logical. It was not always safe. But it was fundamental to what made them human. Jake added that humanity had nearly died out several times on Earth. They had been pushed to the edge of extinction by ice and fire and disease. The only reason they survived was because some humans refused to give up. They kept moving, kept adapting, kept pushing forward even when staying put seemed safer. That drive to explore was not separate from human survival. It was the key to it. Morin asked what humanity wanted from the Council. Lisa's answer was simple: recognition, not as subjects or children, but as equals. The freedom to explore and expand without interference. The right to make their own decisions and their own mistakes. In return, humanity would respect Council territory and follow reasonable protocols for contact with other species. They did not want to conquer anyone. They just wanted to be free. Morin explained the Council's position. The rules about expansion and colonization had been created after terrible wars. Species that expanded too quickly often came into conflict with their neighbors. The Council existed to prevent those conflicts, to maintain peace through structure and oversight. Without rules, the galaxy could descend into chaos again. Lisa understood that. But she pointed out that the Council's rules had been created by species who were already established, who already had their empires and territories. Now they were telling newcomers like humanity that the age of expansion was over. That was convenient for the Council, but deeply unfair to emerging species. It was like climbing a ladder and then pulling it up behind you. Jake mentioned something else. The Council had been watching humanity for decades without making contact. They knew humans were expanding into space. If the Council truly wanted to prevent conflict, they should have made contact earlier. Instead, they waited until humanity had established colonies, and then demanded those colonies be abandoned. That felt less like preventing conflict and more like asserting dominance. Morin was quiet for a long time. Finally, he admitted that Jake was right. The Council had handled first contact with humanity poorly. They had applied old policies without considering the specific situation. They had assumed humanity would respond like other species had. That assumption had been a mistake. Lisa asked what happened now. Morin said that depended on whether both sides could find common ground. The Council could not simply ignore humanity's expansion. Other species would notice. Some might see it as weakness. The carefully maintained order could begin to fracture, but the Council also could not force humanity to comply without a costly war that betrayed the Council's founding principles. Jake suggested a compromise. Humanity would agree to follow protocols for expansion. They would notify the Council before establishing new colonies. They would respect territory claimed by other species. They would participate in conflict resolution mechanisms. But they would not submit to Council authority. They would remain independent, self-governing, free to make their own choices. Morin asked what humanity would offer in return for this independence. Lisa thought about it. She said humanity would share their technology, not weapons but other things, medical advances, agricultural techniques. Engineering solutions. Humans were good at solving problems in unconventional ways. That perspective might be valuable to the Council. She also offered something else: military assistance if needed. The Council had maintained peace for millennia, but Morin had mentioned new threats. Humanity could not match Council technology, but they could fight, and humans had proven throughout their history that they were very good at fighting, especially when defending something they believed in. Morin considered this. He said the proposal was reasonable, but the other councillors would resist. Giving humanity independence would set a precedent. Other species might demand the same treatment. The Council's authority would be diminished. Lisa pointed out that authority based on fear and force was already diminished. Real authority came from respect and consent. If the Council wanted to remain relevant, they needed to evolve. Jake added that humanity was not going away. The Council could work with them or against them, but they could not make them disappear. Would the Council rather have humanity as a partner or as a permanent source of instability? Morin admitted that when framed that way, the choice was obvious. They talked for hours, working through details and potential problems, discussing how to present the agreement to both the Council and Earth, planning for objections and resistance. By the end, they had the outline of a treaty, not perfect but workable, a framework that respected both Council concerns and human freedom. Morin prepared to leave. Before he did, Lisa asked him something that had been bothering her. She asked why he was helping them, why he was willing to challenge Council tradition. Morin smiled. It was a sad smile. He said that he had lived a very long time, long enough to see the Council grow from a desperate alliance into a comfortable bureaucracy. They had forgotten why they existed, forgotten that the purpose was not to control but to protect. Humanity had reminded him of that. Their refusal to kneel was not rebellion. It was a statement that freedom mattered more than safety, and that was a principle worth defending. Jake walked Morin back to his ship. The old counselor moved slowly, but his mind was clearly racing. He was planning how to convince the other counselors, how to frame the treaty so they would accept it. It would not be easy, but Morin had centuries of political experience. If anyone could make it work, he could. Lisa watched from the observation deck as Morin's ship departed. Jake joined her. She said she thought they had a real chance now. The Council was not evil. They were just old and set in their ways. The Council enforcement fleet arrived at New Horizon Colony, 4 weeks after High Counselor Morin returned from his meeting with humanity. Not all the counselors had agreed with Morin's proposal. A significant faction led by Counselor Tharn believed that allowing humanity to remain independent would destroy Council authority. They decided to force the issue. 12 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Horizon system. Each ship was massive. Each one carried weapons that could level cities. The fleet commander was named Kelrix. He had served in the Council military for 80 years. He had enforced Council law on dozens of worlds. He expected this to be routine. New Horizon was a small colony of only 3,000 humans. They lived in domed habitats on the second planet. The world was barely habitable, cold and dry with a thin atmosphere, but it had water and minerals, and humans had made it work. They had been there for 5 years. Children had been born there. The colonists considered it home. Kelrick sent the standard message. The colony was in violation of Council directive. All inhabitants had 48 hours to evacuate. If they did not comply, they would be removed by force. Kelrix expected panic, expected desperate pleas, expected the humans to scramble for their ships and run. What he got instead was silence. For 10 minutes, there was no response at all. Then a woman's voice came through the communication channel. Her name was Betty Walsh. She was the colony administrator. Her voice was calm and steady. She thanked Kelrix for the message. Then she informed him that the colonists were not leaving. They had built New Horizon with their own hands. They had invested years of their lives into making this world livable. They were staying. If the Council wanted them gone, they would have to drag them out. Kelrix was confused. He explained that resistance was futile. His fleet could destroy the colony in minutes. The colonists had no weapons, no shields, no way to fight back. Betty agreed with all of that. Then she asked him if he had ever heard of the concept of mutually assured destruction. Kelrix said he had not. Betty told him he was about to learn. The sensors on Kelrix's flagship suddenly lit up with warnings. All across the New Horizon system, objects were accelerating. The asteroid belt that ringed the star was moving, not drifting. Moving with purpose and speed. Kelrick zoomed in on the sensor data. The asteroids had been hollowed out. Engines had been installed inside them. Guidance systems. The humans had turned hundreds of asteroids into kinetic weapons. Betty's voice came through again. She explained that New Horizon was a mining colony. Moving asteroids was literally their job. They had the equipment and expertise to manipulate objects weighing millions of tons. When the Council had threatened the colony, they had simply repurposed their tools. Every asteroid in the belt was now a potential weapon. Some were aimed at the Council fleet. Others were aimed at the colony itself. Kelrix demanded to know why the colonists would destroy their own home. Betty's answer was simple. If they could not have New Horizon, then nobody would. The Council would gain nothing from attacking except dead humans and a ruined world. That was the deal. Leave the colony alone or everyone loses. Kelrix consulted with his officers. The tactical analysis was grim. They could destroy the incoming asteroids, but not all of them. The humans had launched too many. At least 3 would get through. 3 asteroid impacts would cripple or destroy 3 warships. The fleet would survive, but the cost would be heavy. And that assumed the colonists did not have more surprises waiting. One of Kelrix's officers pointed out something else. If they engaged the asteroids, the humans would know the attack was coming. They would have time to launch even more. The battle would turn into a war of attrition. The Council fleet had better weapons, but the humans had essentially unlimited ammunition. Every rock in the system was a potential threat. Kelrix tried reason. He told Betty that her actions were pointless. Even if she destroyed his fleet, the Council would send more. Bigger fleets. Better prepared. Eventually the colony would fall. Betty agreed again. She said Kelrix was probably right. But that was not the point. The point was making the Council pay for every colony they attacked. New Horizon would cost them 3 ships. The next colony might cost them 5. The one after that 10. How many ships was the Council willing to lose to enforce rules that humans had not agreed to? She added something else. Earth had 12 colonies. If the Council attacked them all, the war would be expensive and long. And while the Council was busy fighting humans, other species would be watching. Some might start asking questions. Why did the Council get to decide who could expand and who could not? What gave them that authority? Humans refusing to kneel was bad enough for Council prestige. But humans fighting back and making it costly would be much worse. Kelrix realized he was facing a dilemma. Attacking would cost him ships and gain nothing. The colony would be destroyed, but the Council would look weak. Species across the galaxy would see that humans could fight back. That defiance had consequences for the Council, not just the defiant. But retreating would also make the Council look weak. It would prove that threats without follow-through were meaningless. Betty gave him an out. She suggested that Kelrix report back to the Council that the colony was more heavily defended than expected, that attacking would be costly and might harm future negotiations. She pointed out that High Counselor Moren was trying to find a peaceful solution. Maybe Kelrix should give peace a chance before starting a war that nobody really wanted. Kelrix made his decision. He ordered the fleet to withdraw. His officers were shocked, but Kelrix overrode their objections. He was a military commander, not a politician. His job was to enforce Council law, but also to preserve Council forces. Throwing away 3 ships to destroy 1 primitive colony was not good strategy. He would report what happened and let the counselors decide the next step. As the Council fleet jumped away, Betty Walsh allowed herself to relax. Her hands had been shaking the entire time, but she had kept her voice steady. The truth was, the asteroid defense had been a desperate gamble. The guidance systems were crude. The engines were barely powerful enough. Half the asteroids probably would have missed even if launched. But Kelrix had not known that. He had seen a threat and decided the cost was too high. The other colonists emerged from the shelters. They had been prepared to evacuate if necessary. Prepared to watch their homes destroyed. Instead, they had won. Not through superior weapons or technology, but through sheer stubborn refusal to make things easy for the Council. News of New Horizons spread quickly. Every human colony heard about it. So did the Galactic Council, and so did every other species in Council space. The response was mixed. Some species admired human courage. Others thought they were insane. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity was not going to be easy to control. High Counselor Morin received Kelrix's report with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was relieved that there had been no battle, no loss of life on either side. On the other hand, Tharn and the other hardline counselors were furious. They saw the retreat as weakness, as proof that the council needed to respond with overwhelming force before the situation got worse. Morin called an emergency session of the High Council. All 5 counselors met in private chambers. Tharn immediately demanded a larger military response. He wanted a fleet of 50 ships sent to Earth itself, force humanity to surrender their weapons and submit to council authority. Make an example that would discourage other species from following humanity's path. Counselor Yira disagreed. She pointed out that attacking Earth would not end well. Humans had shown at New Horizon that they would fight with whatever tools they had. Earth had billions of people, countless resources. If humans could turn mining equipment into weapons, what could they do with actual military hardware? A war against Earth would be long and bloody. Counselor Vex brought up the economic cost. Council ships were expensive. Trained crew were even more expensive. Every ship lost at New Horizon would have cost millions of credits and years of training time. Multiply that across multiple engagements and the Council would be spending enormous resources. Resources that could be used for actual threats instead of fighting a species that just wanted to be left alone. Tharn argued that the cost did not matter. The principle mattered. If the Council backed down now, they would be seen as weak. Other species would start pushing boundaries, testing limits. The entire system of Council authority would collapse. Morin asked a simple question. Was the system worth preserving if it could only be maintained through violence against species who had done nothing wrong? That question hung in the air. Tharn had no good answer. The Council had been created to prevent extinction, to stop the kind of wars that nearly destroyed the galaxy, but now they were talking about starting a war to enforce obedience. The irony was not lost on anyone. Yira suggested they accept Morin's proposal. Give humanity independence in exchange for cooperation. It would be a new precedent, but not necessarily a bad one. The Council could evolve, could become something more than an empire enforcing rules, could become a true alliance where members joined by choice, not compulsion. Vex worried about the precedent. If humanity got independence, other species would want it too. The treaty signing took place on Earth. The Council had suggested a neutral location, but humanity insisted. If the Council wanted partnership, they needed to come to human space, to see Earth with their own eyes, to understand what they were making an alliance with. High Counselor Morin agreed. He arrived with a small delegation on a cool autumn morning. They landed at the United Earth headquarters in Geneva. President Helen Carter greeted them personally. She was a tall woman with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She shook Morin's hand in the human custom. Morin returned the gesture carefully. He had studied human body language and knew that a firm handshake indicated respect and confidence. Helen's grip was very firm. The ceremony was broadcast across Earth and to every human colony. Billions of people watched as their president and the High Counselor signed the treaty. It was a simple document in the end. Humanity recognized the Galactic Council's role in maintaining interstellar peace. The Council recognized humanity as an independent sovereign power. Both agreed to cooperate on matters of mutual interest and respect each other's territory and rights. What made it revolutionary was what the treaty did not contain. There was no clause about Council oversight of human expansion, no requirement that humanity seek permission before establishing colonies, no submission to Council authority. Humanity was free, truly free. For the first time in Council history, a species had joined the galactic community on their own terms. After the signing, Morin asked to see more of Earth. Helen arranged a tour. She wanted the Council to understand what humanity was, not just their technology or their military capability, but their culture and history. She took Morin to museums that showed human evolution, from primitive hunters to spacefaring civilization. Morin saw the long climb, the countless generations that had struggled and died so their children could have better lives. Helen showed him monuments to human achievement. The pyramids of Egypt that humans built with nothing but muscle and determination. The Great Wall of China that stretched across a continent. The Apollo landing sites on the moon where humans first stepped off their homeworld, using computers less powerful than a modern calculator. Morin began to understand that humanity's refusal to kneel was not arrogance. It was inheritance. They came from ancestors who never gave up, who never accepted limits. That stubbornness was in their blood. She also showed him the darker parts of human history. The museums dedicated to genocides and wars, the memorials for victims of oppression, the records of humanity's many failures. Morin asked why she was showing him these things. Helen said it was important that the council understood humanity completely. The good and the bad. Humans were capable of terrible things, but they were also capable of learning from their mistakes, of growing, of becoming better. Morin asked if humans would continue to fight among themselves. Helen admitted that yes, probably. Humans still had conflicts and disagreements, but they were learning to resolve them without violence, learning to see their common humanity as more important than their differences. It was slow progress, but it was progress. She said the same thing would be true with the council. There would be disagreements and tensions, but with good faith on both sides they could be resolved. 3 months after the treaty signing, the first joint council human mission launched. It was an exploration vessel heading into uncharted space. The crew was mixed. Humans and aliens working together. Jake Morrison was given command. It was a gesture of trust from the council. They were putting their people under human leadership. Jake knew the weight of that responsibility. The ship was called the Pioneer. It was built using both human and council technology. Human engines modified with council power systems. Council sensors enhanced with human computing. The result was something neither could have built alone. It was faster than any human ship and more adaptable than any council vessel. A symbol of what cooperation could achieve. Amy Barnes served as Jake's second officer. She had been promoted after New Horizon. Her quick thinking during the crisis had impressed Earth Command. Now she was working alongside aliens who had been enemies just months ago. She found it strange at first, but the alien crew members were professional and curious about humans. They asked questions about Earth and human culture. She did the same about their worlds. Slowly, friendships formed. The Pioneer's first mission was to investigate a system on the far edge of known space. Long-range sensors had detected unusual energy signatures. It could be natural phenomena, or it could be signs of intelligent life. Either way, it needed investigation. The ship made the jump and arrived in a system with 7 planets orbiting a yellow star. The energy signatures were coming from the 3rd planet. As they got closer, the sensors confirmed it. Artificial structures. Radio signals. A civilization in the early stages of space exploration. They had satellites in orbit and what looked like a small space station under construction. This was first contact. Not with an established species, but with newcomers like humanity had been. Jake called a meeting of senior officers. They needed to decide how to proceed. The old council protocol would be to observe from a distance, collect data, wait years or decades before making contact, let the species develop naturally without interference. But Jake thought about how humanity had felt when they learned the council had been watching them for years. It had felt like a violation, like being studied as lab specimens. One of the alien officers named Zara suggested they follow protocol. She said the species below was not ready for contact. They still fought wars among themselves. They had not achieved faster than light travel. They could not even communicate beyond their own system. Revealing the existence of the galactic community now could cause cultural shock. Could harm their natural development, Amy disagreed. She pointed out that humanity had been at the same stage not long ago. Being kept in the dark had not protected them. It had just delayed the inevitable shock. She suggested honesty. Make contact. Explain that they were not alone. Offer guidance and support. Let the species decide how they wanted to proceed. Jake made the decision. They would make contact, but carefully. Send a simple message in the species' own languages. Explain who they were. Offer to meet if the species was interested. No demands, no ultimatums. Just an open hand extended in friendship. The message was composed with care. It explained that the Pioneer represented the Galactic Council and humanity, that there were many intelligent species in the universe, that this species was invited to join the galactic community when they were ready. The message ended with coordinates for a meeting if they wanted to talk. The response came 3 days later. It was cautious and full of questions. The species called themselves the Kell. They wanted to know if this was real. If the aliens were truly friendly, if there was a trick or hidden agenda. Jake recorded a response. He said there was no trick. The galaxy was vast and full of life. The Kell had neighbors now. Neighbors who wanted to help, not conquer. The meeting took place in orbit above the Kel homeworld. A small shuttle brought representatives up to the Pioneer. Jake greeted them in the docking bay. The Kel were smaller than humans, covered in soft fur with large eyes that seemed to take in everything. Their leader was named Tira. She looked around the ship in wonder. This was their first time seeing alien technology up close. Jake gave them a tour, showed them the engines and the sensors in the living quarters, introduced them to crew members both human and alien. Tira asked if all species in the council worked together like this. Jake explained that it was new, that humans had only recently joined and that cooperation was still being figured out. But yes, this was the goal. Different species working toward common purposes. Tira asked the question Jake had been expecting. She asked if the Kel would be forced to follow council rules, if they would have to give up their independence. Jake smiled. He told her about humanity's first contact with the council, about the demands and the refusal, about the standoff at New Horizon, about humans turning mining equipment into weapons rather than surrender. Tira's eyes went wide. Jake explained the treaty, how humanity had negotiated for independence, how the council had learned that cooperation worked better than control. He said the Kel would be offered the same choice: join the council as partners or remain independent. Either way, they would be respected. There would be no demands, no threats, just an offer to be part of something bigger. Tira asked what humanity gained from helping the Kel. Jake thought about how to answer. He said that humanity remembered being alone, being small and vulnerable in a vast universe. When they learned about the council, they had felt betrayed that no one had reached out earlier. So now humans were making sure other species did not feel that same isolation. They were extending the hand they wished someone had extended to them. The Kel delegation returned to their planet. They promised to consider the offer carefully. Jake did not push. The Pioneer remained in the system for 2 weeks. During that time, Kel scientists came aboard to study the technology. Human and council experts went down to the planet to share knowledge. By the time the Pioneer left, both sides had learned from each other. Jake filed his report with both Earth Command and the Council. He described the successful first contact,